My name's John Miner, and I am a SQL MVP. I've been lucky enough to get that 7 times, and I work for a company called Insight. I write for MS SQL Tips. Okay, so you don't want to see me, so I'm gonna hide my face. Okay, and we're gonna go through the presentation. Hopefully, you can learn about two things. Okay, we're gonna talk about Azure Synapse Service Pools and the reason why you'd want to use them. And there's two ways to actually create them. There's one which is the polybase syntax, which is the MPP. Okay, so if you remember the Azure Data Warehouse, now it's the dedicated SQL pool. And there's also you can use Spark SQL. Okay, so I'm gonna hide my camera. I'm going to start the presentation. Okay, so I got a lot of stuff going on here. So let me hide this. Let me hide this, and let's go to the top. So bear with me. This is a brand new presentation, hot off the press. I've done some work with this before, but I've never had a chance to put it into a deck. So you're the first one seeing this deck, and hopefully I'll be refining it over time. Let's hide the presenter view, and we'll go over some slides, and there's a bunch of demos. Okay, so we're going to talk about serverless pools. Business problem. Many organizations, okay, uh, consolidating all the information assets into a data lake. Why do you want to do that? Because you can do structured, non-structured data, which, having a single glass pane of all the data in one place is really good. What do most people do? Well, most people use Apache Spark cluster to transform and increase the quality of data. So you have different zones or directories, and you have ROR, and ROR is like a qualified zone. Then you have refined. Maybe you made some fixes. Okay, for instance, say if you had a customer, maybe you fixed an address, right? And then curated is where you go. But the problem is that if you have to leave this cluster up all the time to actually service queries, guess what? You're getting charged for those VMs being up, and it could be quite costly. Okay. Is there a better way to do it? And I think there is. Okay. Azure Synapse Serverless Pools, okay, is there, and it replaced the interactive Spark cluster. I have a client that actually did this for the dedicated pool and saved a bunch of money. Okay. And that's another way they were doing polybase. Okay. Two types of database. Okay. So let's look at a diagram to the right over here, and this kind of tells the whole picture. Okay. So we have Spark, and Spark creates something called the lake database. Okay. And in lake databases, there's only two types of objects. You can have a table, okay, and you can have a view. In the SQL pool, there's a bunch more objects because it's actually supporting that polybase stuff. So you have external resource, external file, external table. I'm going to go in detail on each one of these. And then you get your views, right? So why do you want to do this? Because it does scale out architecture, okay, under the hood. So there is a control node and there's a bunch of compute nodes. Okay, you have the separation of compute and storage, okay? And the cool thing about it is the service pool at the very bottom scales automatically. You don't have to worry about it. You basically adapts to, say, if a node fails, or better yet, you suddenly created a query and it thinks it's too big, it'll suddenly scale, right? Which is great. So let's go into depth. And right over here, this kind of looks like, Azure Dedicated Pool. And guess what? It basically is. So, they took the service that's for a dedicated pool and made it serverless so that, you know, uh, it actually works, right? So you control node, like I said, and that's how we're going to talk to it. On this example at the very end, we're going to talk to it uh, outside the Synapse using SSMS, but it could have been Power BI, it could have been Tableau, it could be anything, right? Which is kind of great because now you're replacing that Spark cluster again with this serverless SQL pool or data lake or database or SQL database, and guess what? Now it's a lot cheaper, okay? So one of the things is the read-only nature, right? There's no read-write in this. A data lake is usually just a read-only thing. You do processing to get to the final stage, okay? We talked about external tables and views, and you can do aggregations, right? You can do aggregations with views. One of the things you can do, and I'm kind of keeping out of here, is CTAS, okay? Create table as, okay? And the reason why I'm keeping that is I think it's frowned upon, right? You're using all the data lake to do all this engineering already. Why don't you work with your data lake engineer to actually get the data in the final state versus, use the cluster to do that. Don't use the SQL pool. Uh, once you get the tables and maybe there's some roll-ups you need to do, great. But if you need to do major aggregation, go back to your data lake designer and work with them. Okay. So this is going to be a sample data set we're going to use to the right. It's internet sales, and you probably remember it because it's EventWorks, right? And it has a complete schema for teaching. And what's the cool thing is that if you go back to the VentureWorks, you can get CSV files, and these can be placed in data lake storage. And these CSV files can be converted to Parquet to save space. And we'll talk about you know, the types of files that are supported, delimited, Parquet, Delta, and we'll talk about why Parquet is the preferred format. Okay, so let me hit escape for a second and let me show you where the data is. So if we look here, we have AdventureWorks, and guess what? Here's our AdventureWorks, right? And if we want, this one was the original, which had an image in it, and I didn't want the image. I mean, obviously we can bring it up to the data lake, but it doesn't make sense. And we can actually see the schema. And there's a need for this because obviously many of these technologies, you have to supply the schema because it's schema on read. Okay, let's go back to, haven't started talking about what's in Azure. So let's minimize. I gotta find my right window. This guy here. Okay, so this is Azure here, but I'm gonna go to the dashboard and let's see what's up here. Okay, so we have Azure Synapse Workspace and we have the storage. So let's look at the data lake because everything's based upon the data, right? So containers, right? And guess what? We have Synapse and we have two files, right? So we have the CSV files I just showed you. And I wrote a program, I'll go quickly over it to create it to Parquet files. Now you say, well, what's wrong with the Parquet file? Well, a Parquet file, when you use Synapse or Spark, should I say, in general, and you write something, guess what? You're not going to get a clean file. You're going to get a directory. It usually has a success, a complete, so on files. And then you got a petition, right? This has one petition. I knew that internet sales might be bigger, so I made 4 petitions, and guess what? We have 4 petitions, okay? So a little about the data lake structure you need to know to actually be successful, okay? Not too much though. So let's go back to this and talk about how we can make this work. Okay, so we talked about the data design pattern. Have existing files saved to data lake storage. We already talked about that. Create a connection from Synapse to ADLS. We're going to talk about that in a soon. Create a database and or schema objects. Okay, certain data, lake databases don't support schema. SQL databases support hierarchy, so you can do schema. So you can create external file types. We talked about that. External data sources, external tables on schema for read. We talked about creating views. Users. This is a tough area right now. I saw a article on Stack Overflow. I answered it, but guess what? I'm gonna have to go back to the product group. I think there's an issue with the documentation and or implementation, and I need to find out what's going on. Okay, and once I know, I'll tell you. Okay, and basically, typically, you usually create a logon, a user, and give rights to database, and you test it. Okay, so SQL database. Developer can create the following objects. We talked about a database schema, external table, view, external file format, external table source. Okay. Each database, if you didn't say create a schema, guess what? There's DBO, just like SQL Server. I suggest using schemas so you can segregate data and actually assign security that way. Again, it's a nice way to partition stuff in a database. External tables use the polybase syntax. You can also do ad hoc queries using open row set. So let's look at our first SQL notebook. It's called Exploration, okay? I'm gonna skip over the fact that, guess what, I already have a connection and it's already set up, okay? In fact, I have a database, I'm gonna drop it, okay? So this is a SQL database. And now we're gonna go to, this is 2 tabs I wanted to talk about. When you go into Synapse, there's a workspace tab and there's a link tab, okay? Let's talk about the link. I'm gonna go over it in a slide, but I'll do the demo part of it now. And what you need to do is there's different ways to set up security, okay? We can come down here, there's account key. Guess what? Frowned upon, because once you get the key, you own everything. Service principal, same thing, kind of. It's better than account key. It's a username and password, but guess what? If you forget to change the password or someone guesses that, they get the access, right? Best way, system side and managed identity. Why is system side and managed identity really good? That is good because it's like a service principal, but it uses valet tokens and it changes the password. So now you get something that is like a service principal username internally, but it's changing the password to make sure the connection's there, okay? So I'm going to discard changes because I didn't make anything. Nice thing about the linked view is, guess what? Once it's set up, you can actually go in and change access. So now I can see there's Parquet files, back to the same view that I was looking at through there. Here's my CSV files, right? So on, I could just say new SQL script and try to create external table. I can say load to a data frame or create a new Spark table. So some cheats there, okay? But I don't like cheating, so we'll go through the actual code, make it nice. Anything else I want to show you? Oh yes, one last thing is to get the managed principal to work, there's two roles that you have to do. And again, I will recover this when we go with storage, but you need access control, okay? And access control is something called role-based access security, okay? And if we click roles over here, that's the different roles. You can do assignments, right? And what we're going to do is we scroll down, we can see that I already gave Azure Synapse a contributor, right? Okay, that's required. And it also needs to have access to blob storage data contributor, okay? You can also give them reads if you want. This one writes, but again, it's a read-only system, doesn't really matter, okay? So now that I showed you the storage, let's go to the workspace. And this is the workspace, and these are the tables. So this is a data lake table. This is based upon Spark. You can see there's only views and tables, like I said, and we'll show how to create those. And this is a SQL database. This is based upon the Polybase, right? You can see now that we have something called schemas, right? We have all the fun stuff that we think about, you know, data reader, data writer, right? We have security, right? So we can have a user like Dogbert, which I created, and so on. And we can create views, right? So this is a view and we can query it. So if we like went here, once we create this in here, this is the interactive one in Spark, we can do this. Built in is the one. If you had a dedicated, you would have a also your MPP appliance here, but we have a built-in, which is serverless. Use a database, we got a default because it's Spark, got a master because it's SQL. So you got a best of both worlds. You got Spark's MS SQL tips and you got sales. So if we run this, guess what? It's just gonna invalid object. Did I change anything? Oh yeah, because I don't know why, but I right clicked it and it said DBO prepared data, but I thought I changed this to sales LT and maybe that's not just refreshed. Because I was playing, like I said, this is a brand new presentation. So if we hit refresh or hit refresh here, yeah, that was an old view. So just make sure if you get something that's not working, we'll talk about how we got here, right? But again, we're going to destroy everything and build it up 3 times. And I'll show you each time we'll repetitively get better, okay? So let's do the very first example, right? First exploration. We can use master, okay? So we can run it and it's going to change master here, right? And we can list databases, right? What do we have out there? And we can see we have master MS SQL sales LT and the default, right? Same thing as we saw before. So now I'm going to drop the database. Oh my God, it's gone. Okay. And now if we go back here and look at it, well, is it still working? Yeah, it's still working. It's thinking. Shouldn't be this big. Cannot because it's currently in use. Oh, I know why. So I'm trying to drop it, and guess what? I got a connection here. So I'm going to disconnect. Okay. And now this is a VM that I'm talking to it. So you can see the VM here. So let's try this again. Run there and then drop, run. Shouldn't be any more connections as far as I know. Just get rid of it. Sure there's no connections open. Can't be in use. Okay. Some reason didn't like the script. I just manually dropped it. You can see now there's only a lake database and there's no SQL database. So let's try first presentation. So we talked about looking at the databases, then we can create a new database, right? And now if we go ahead and create the use database, we can switch to it. Okay, and we see nothing there. Okay, so now if we come back here, hopefully it's smart enough to recognize it. Sometimes it is not. So, you know, again, Synapse got a little bugs once in a while. Worst comes worst, we refresh the whole thing, which is not cool, but and it's going to query it, as you can see, and suddenly now it found MS SQL tips, okay? So the very first thing we want to do is we want to create a external file type, okay? How are we going to talk to stuff? One thing we can do is we can say it's a pipe delimited text file, right? Delimited with a pipe, false, use MS SQL tips. And now I got a format, right? Once we get the format, we need to say, hey, where are we getting the data from, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to create a data source to here. Usually you had to pass like the shared access key using a credential. Good thing is we don't have to do that anymore. That was very risky. Again, shared access keys versus just using managed identity. This one just says, hey, this data source points to my storage container at my storage account, okay? Boom, so I'm running it. And now what we can do is we can say, hey, look at the currency table and create an external table. So how do we do this? We drop the table if it exists, right? And that's going to fail. So I'm going to comment that out. But it's good if you have to rebuild, right? Interesting things we have to pass it the schema because it doesn't know what it is. And then we say, make me a table. Okay. Now at this point, if we select from that table, okay, we can see that we have some currency, right? Different types of currency, and I only select the top 10. There's a lot more than that, okay? There's different ways to do this stuff. In the past, Microsoft supported something called Open Row Set. And so we could do bulk Open Row Set, format CSV, pipe delimited, header equals false, and then we can do the same thing, but not creating a table. Problem is if we don't create a table, no one else can use it other than you querying through Synapse, okay? So it doesn't make sense, right? Say if we want to hook Power BI to this, we want to actually create a table. Okay, and at the last point, just like anything else, we can use master, we can hit run, and guess what? It's going to drop everything. So if we go back here, hit refresh, okay, guess what? No more. So let's go back to the slides, and then we're going to go back and forth between slides and presentations. So we talked about creating objects, right? That was our first notebook, okay? We did some, showed you how to use Open Row Set. We talked about creating external data source, external file type, and external table, okay? So next thing we're going to talk about is storage. Okay, there's many different types of storage. You can do Azure Blob Storage, right? You can also do HTTPS storage count, okay? You can also do old-fashioned data lake Gen 1, which is going away in another year, so don't do it. I suggest that you use Azure Data Lake Gen 2 storage because of those two levels of security. RBAC, which is, reader, contributor, owner, and then ACLs, which is access control list, read, write, execute, okay? So basically, again, I talked about it supports a account key, service principal, user / manage identity. Older way, you could do a database credential. It's frowned upon. Don't do it. Okay. The preferred way is to use the managed identity, which I showed you. Just create a connection. You're all done. The managed identity needs to have contributor and blob storage rights. We talked about that. And the managed identity should be given read-write access control level. Okay. If you are curious about that, look it up. I have articles. There's plenty of stuff out there. So SQL database. Well, com separated delimited would be kind of boring, right? So what other ones are there? There's the Apache, and again, I'm gonna edit this because, like I said, escape. Apache Parquet file format. And it also supports a Delta format, but it's only Open Row Set, and I hope that they're gonna do it. But again, there's two ways to do this, right? You can actually do it through Spark, or you can do it through Polybase. So I'm hoping that eventually they'll add it, but that's not there yet, okay? I'm going to go through as many slides as I can get through and then go back to presentations because I know that I wasn't given that much time. So data, how do you charge, right? Because we talked about, we'll show you how to create tables and then I'll rebuild the whole thing again. But how you charge? You charge by data, while reading metadata. Okay, the amount of data. And intermediate. Can someone mute, please? Thank you. The amount of data and intermediate results, still bit feedback, and the amount of data written to storage, okay? So how can you change this? Well, the thing you can do is you can actually use Parquet. Parquet is a column compressed format, okay? Again, I'm purposely leaving out CTS, create table as. You can do it if you want to do data engineering in this step. I suggest you don't. It's going to create a contained table, and when you delete the table, it actually deletes it, and you have to rebuild it. Um, what's the difference with the lake data house? And again, I'm going to get into that too. There's only tables and views. I suggest you use Spark SQL to create the tables. Okay, the syntax of Parquet is very compact. I'll show you it because it's smart enough on the Spark engine to read the metadata, and so you don't have to do all the extra stuff that we're doing. And the Spark engine supports a ton of file formats, JSON, so on. Whatever you can do to create a table, you can do it. Again, the problem I have right now is I can create a user that's AD and give them all rights to the SQL pull, and guess what? Suddenly works. But if I just want to give them read rights, I'm having some issues. And again, I'm going to reach out to the product group and make sure I get that syntax right. What's documented does not work, of course. Usually for the security related, right? Usually create, and again, I'm going to change this because again, I just was working on this last night. But we wanted to create database login, right? And then create, I meant server login, and then database user. And then assign rights, right? That's how we really want to do it. And then test the access, okay? And last but not least, we have a summary page. So I've kind of gotten through all the slides, which is good. Let me dismiss. And now we're going to go back to demos, which I have a ton of demos. Okay. So last time we deleted the database, it's gone. Okay. So let's get it back. Okay. So our second exploration, we're going to look around. We're going to try to do the same thing. We're going to say drop it if it exists. Going to run it. And guess what? There's nothing there. We're going to create it. I'm going to use it. Okay. Then what we're going to do is we can do an ad hoc of Parquet. Remember I said Parquet is better? So let's do an ad hoc. And are we in the right place? Dim customers. Syntax near top. Let's try this again. Of course, you know what happens is you do it at night and something's set correctly in your environment, and then you try it in a demo. So there you go. I don't know why it didn't work. Who knows? Sometimes it's buggy. So we can see that without this, we're doing a bulk copy. And guess what? We're querying it, and it already knows because Parquet is a format, it's column compressed, it's binary, it knows the file types, it already knows everything. See how easy it's to use? We can do a CSV. Now, if we don't pass anything in the CSV, you say it's pipe delimited, we can run it. Oops, see, again, it just gave me the same issue. So I'm going to do go. Maybe it doesn't like it because there's no go, or maybe there's again, this is an interpreter for their Spock pool. Maybe it just doesn't like the syntax. Let's try it again because I know it was right. And see, now I change it. So the interesting thing is when we use a delimiter and there's no header file, guess what? It automatically just guesses that stuff, and it's going to treat everything as pretty much text, okay? So we can create different formats. Like we can go back to this delimited file, okay, and create a format for that. We can create a format for Parquet. It's a lot easier. See, there's nothing to do. And then we can create our data source again, which we need when we create tables. And then if we go ahead and we create a table dim, see now we have to pass the syntax, right? With it, the location, okay, run it, okay. And now we can query the table. We can see if we can get a few rows back, right? 10. Now we can do the same thing, but this time we're going to create external table internet sales, different directory. Remember I said it's just a bunch of files. It's going to read 4 up this time, okay? And we say, hey, create it, and now we can query it, run it, and it should come back. Okay, so now I showed you can do Parquet too, okay? So I'm going to drop it, okay? I don't want to publish it. Maybe I made a change, so close and discard. I probably should have kept the change because those semicolons, I'll go back and do that before I publish this. Last but not least, for the SQL demos, we're going to go through, and again, it's gone, right? If we look here, MS SQL tips should have been dropped. I don't know why it didn't drop it, but easy enough to fix, right? So drop database if exists, right? And then MS SQL tips, okay, and then run it, okay. So now this time we're going to actually build everything out, okay? So run, boom. If exist when asks. Excuse me. So we're gonna run this because it's currently in use. Where is it currently in use? I don't have it anywhere else. Okay, close and discard. We'll do it the way we did it last time. Unfortunately, I'm gonna have to do a refresh. Okay, so it sees there's one database here. We're gonna get rid of it. So we're gonna delete. Yeah, this is kind of weird because we know there's nothing there. I closed everything out, but it's thinking that there's something reading it. And it's like, there really isn't. Maybe it's a distributive node or something that thinks it's still out there. Try this one more time. And again, deleting and adding databases, not something that you do that often, but obviously with this distributed environment, maybe something's holding on to a handle. It's currently used, but guess what? I'm not using it. So let's just leave it for now. And what we can do is just clean up. We'll just drop. One of the things I also want to do is when we created the DIM currency and DIM database, fact internet sales, we can see, okay, that it actually created them in schemas that we don't want, right? We don't want probably this, right? We usually want to put it in a schema that we own, right? So what we're going to do is we'll just manually clean it up. So we're going to delete table. Hopefully it allows me to do this. Should, right? And drop table. Sorry about that. A little tired this morning. Didn't get too much sleep. Seriously? It's definitely supported. Okay, now we're having some issues. Let's try this again. So third exploration, we're going to try it again. So create database, right? But the second exploration, we should have had a, okay, so use master, drop database. Let's try that. Okay, so maybe it worked this time. Who knows? Sometimes it's just, like I said, this server sometimes weird because it's distributed. If something doesn't work, just try it again. It'll suddenly work, okay? Especially when creating, once it's created though, again, this is a read-only data source that we're trying to create. It's there. So now what we want to do now is we can select star from sys databases, create the database, right? Create schemas, create a Parquet file format, create the external file format, and then for each of the tables, okay, we're going to go ahead and we're going to create them. So I'm just going to run this, okay? Hopefully it doesn't break. Last night was working on it, like I said, late. So that creates all, if you want to peek at the data here, sometimes you do get a bad definition. Maybe you have to put these in. And guess what? Not all file formats from SQL Server are supported in the service. So it's a little different. So you have to make changes, like a float's not supported. Okay. Last but not least, we want to take a union all of all this and take a look, right? So if we go Control Home, and why doesn't it allow me to run this? Okay, select database, master. Have no idea. I'm just going to run it all, see what happens. So that's the very first one. Where did it say? Let's look where it says create view must be the first statement. Okay, so it did everything but except for the create view. That's awesome. So let's go back and hit refresh. And then what we're going to do is go to view. And I get to show you stuff. Awesome. So now MS SQL Tips has external tables. And now I created all the tables in the actual demo that I wanted to create for you. Okay. And it stopped at view because view has to be the only thing in a batch. You know, it's one of the rules. And I don't know why that was ever there, but still one. If you're curious, we could run this right here. And we'll do this as kind of a little complex SQL. But again, it's going against tables, which is kind of cool, right? And so now we can see that there's a table name and the total number of records. Okay, we can go all the way down. We can see fact internet sales has 60,000. The reason it has 64,000. This view basically joins all the tables together. So we're going to join basically internet sales against date, against product category, customer geography, territory, and we'll just create it, right? So let's do it. If this is the only thing in the batch, it's going to work. Again, um, maybe it's something that, if you're deploying something, you'll have to run it separately. Okay, now we have it. Let's aggregate it. So now what we want to do is we want to look at the prepared data by calendar year, month, region. And what we want to know is we want to know what models are selling, where, the total quantity, and how much money we're making. Okay. And that might be a typical query, right? That, end user might do, right? In Power BI, right? So we could set this up. Could even create another view if that's the only thing you're presenting. Okay. One of the things I want to tell you is look at messages. When you look at messages, okay, it tells you that this is a statement ID. There was a query hashed, right? Had to come up with a plan to do it, right? Distributed ID was done. Size of the data is 2 megabytes. Total size move is 1. So this is how you're getting charged, okay? There's ways to, on the service, okay, on the pool itself, and I'll show you at the very end, to set up controls for this so you don't run out of too much money, okay? But again, this is a lot cost effective versus just leaving up VMs all the time, okay? And we can look at the results. So we're looking at now, I got a nice report year, a report month, the region it was sold, the model number, how many I sold, and the total amount of money sold. Okay. So basically, we built a whole data lake, okay, database or SQL database on top of the data lake using this technology. Okay. Let's look what's different. Okay. Say if we wanted to do it in Spark. Okay. So we talked about those. These are going to be two notebooks I'm going to do. One is Spark database code, and one is Spark Write Parquet. So the Spark Write Parquet just reads up the Parquet file and this writes back. Okay, so path, the select statement. So it reads from something that was published here for the CSVs, and then what does it write to Parquet? So I didn't have Parquet files for this, and I'll rename those accordingly in the future. How do you use this? So we'd say use default. That's just like when you to get it, right? You have to go ahead and get a node, and use default is the like master, and then create a database. And then what we can do is the syntax is pretty much similar, but instead of doing, I have to create a location, like a file format, and also a file's data source. Guess what? I just specify the full path. As long as there's a connector, it works. I also specify, hey, I want to use CSV. Do I have a header? No. Default. And guess what? I make the types. Right? Boom, boom, boom. Guess what? We repeat this similarly, and it's going to work. So let's go down to the same check that I did last time, and let's start the cluster up, and we'll take a look. And I'll show you that it works exactly the same, and then we'll look at it through SSMS, and we'll wrap up, okay? So to start this, we have to cancel. I cancel all. I did not want to cancel all. Stop. I want to just run this guy. I always forget, I usually do a lot of work in Databricks. I always forget how this works here. So anyways, we're going to run this. Why don't we switch to another topic? The last topic talks about connectivity, right? So far we created this great thing in Azure Synapse. We have this serverless pool. We can actually look at the data warehouse. That's what we wanted. We're going to save money. How do we connect to it? Okay. Well, you can set up a AD user and give it a SQL admin privilege to the Spark cluster since read only, and guess what? Suddenly they have access. That's a lot of access though, right? And what I was trying to do before this is to narrow down the access, okay, to just have data reader, okay? And I'll show you what it's doing and why it's not working. And if you find something, tell me. If not, probably gonna run it right out to the product group on Monday and see if I can get an answer on this. It should work. The documentation says it works one way and it doesn't really. Now, if you were just going ahead and creating this for, say, a service, maybe I'm creating serverless pools to just get everything presented the way I wanted so that I could give the Power BI designers a way to connect to that serverless pool to pull the data. Then, have an account that had over privileges, not so bad because it's used by a service, right? You're writing reports with. So I don't know how this got here, but we can see right here that we're going to connect to the server endpoint, okay, using Dilbert, which is a account I have, and just hit connect. I don't know why I brought up a USQL program. I'm doing USQL for one client right now. And now, guess what? We can see the MS SQL tips, right? And external tables we created, and we can see that view. Now, know what's interesting that I notice that, again, it's another question I'm going to ask the product group, is that we have sales here, right? We have external tables. I can see all the external tables, right? I created a view. What happened to my view? I can't see it. So there's two questions I'm going to really ask the product group. And again, I don't maybe people just haven't really pushed on them to find out why this is happening now. This is still going. So while that's going, I'm going to multitask because we're out of time almost. Here's our built-in group. Right here, okay, is the cost control. Okay, so you can go here and you say today, data process is 840 megabytes. I really read 3 gigabytes, okay? And that's how you're getting, so you can say daily limit and you can enable it, weekly limit, monthly limit. So you can do limiting of the data so that, you can keep your costs down if you see they're coming up too much. We already showed you the link service to create the Gen 2 connections, right? Another thing you want to do is security, right? And again, I'll show you how I set up Dilbert if it goes there. Access control. And then the access control, we can see Dilbert, and I gave him Synapse SQL Administrator. I tried giving an account just the user, okay, Synapse user, didn't work. Let's go here. So did this come back? So it came back, and we can see it worked, and it queried this. And again, we have the view here, and I'm going to show you that the view exists, but it's just not being shown for some reason in SQL. So that's definitely a issue with their service, right? So right here, the report view is under this lake database. I got a view here, and guess what? I can't see it, right? Under the SQL database, guess what? We have all the same similar things. And then if we hit refresh, what's the last thing was to do a view, we have the view there, okay? So let me wrap this up. So in summary, the data lake follows the Spoken Hub design pattern. Okay. Source data from producers can be either pushed or pulled into the data lake, right? Processing can be done on a subset of data and usually use Spark, or even if you use like mapping data flows, right? You're still using Databricks underneath the engine, okay? And you can do like the person before me was talking about data science. You can do data science to predict stuff and save that to the lake. The final curated data should be in a zone like curation for consumers to do analytic reports. So in the past, we had to actually do a very expensive Spark cluster, and it had to be available, okay, to service read-only queries against a database lake. So now what we have is these VMs just sitting there doing nothing, right, most of the time. Serverless pools, guess what? You get charged for what you do. And there's two types of syntax. We talked about the SQL database having the poly-based syntax with external tables, external file formats. We also have the data lake, which has the Spark SQL syntax, okay? I'm going to have to ask about that view. That's a deficiency. I think it's a bug on their end, or at least in SSMS, it's a bug. Second thing is, I think there's also an issue with creating SQL use. The consumers charge for only the bytes you read. And in short, basically, it's a cheaper option, right? References, serverless pools, external tables, row set. We went over query storage, create table. We also went over data types. Okay, data types are really important, and that was one thing I skipped over. So I'm going to go back to that, and then we're going to wrap up. So in here, okay, you're going to see that the data types for defining the table, string, short, int, are totally different than SQL data types. So make sure you do the mapping, okay? Decimal supported, strings, and again, just don't worry about the cases. There's probably just me playing around late at night trying to do this, but yeah, everything works here. Last but not least, if we went over here and I want to show you the connection strings stuff. If we go back to the create security layer, what should happen is we should be able to drop a login, create a login, and do that. So if we're in master, okay, and we select start from syslogons and we run this query, okay, we can see there's a bunch of logons. And guess what? I can see Dogbert from, I missed actual, maybe that's the reason why. Did I? No, I did it all over the place though, wrong. Dogbert's supposed to have a G in it, right? But I did Daubert. So anyways, again, being left late. So this shows you the SQL logons, right? This shows you the drop user, create user, add role. The interesting thing is we're in this connection right here as a user, as an admin user. And what we can do is we can go down to security, and on the security and the logins, I'm going to show you Dogbert. And so Dogbert exists there, and under the actual, I just want to make sure I'm the right one, MS SQL tips, we can see that I added security. And then roles, users is going to be Dogbert there. He was there. If not, I will recreate him. And that's the problem is right now is the connection. So I'm going to stop presenting. In short, I think, using serverless pools is a great alternative to Spark. And other than two little bugs that I will either get the product group working on or document, it's a great alternative to have a SQL compliant service talking to your data lake without having the expensive cost of a Spark cluster. So again, I apologize running about the same time over because I wasn't given the same time, but I appreciate your time, Sean. Thank you for having me talk this morning.
John,
Is there any questions?
Yeah, two questions is there. One ask you that is there any other way to move data without using parquet file?
Say it again.
Is there any other way to move data from your on-prem in warehouse to Azure Synapse data lake?
Yes.
Without parquet file?
Yeah, you can do anything you want. The supported formats for the serverless, okay, are delimited in Parquet. You can do Delta, but the problem is Delta is not really supported. So the problem is not good because you can't create that external tables, right? You could use the SQL. I meant the Spark SQL to do a lot more formats. Spark SQL supports JSON. Anything that's related with Spark has a lot more formats. So that's probably the way you want to go. I showed you two ways to do it. You can do it in Spark. You can do it in Polybase syntax. The Spark syntax gives you a lot more options.
Okay. Another question is how you are going to connect SQL Server, how you are going to connect serverless SQL pool from SQL Server Management Studio.
I just showed you. So I'll
which user
show it again.
actually he asked that which user was used for connecting SQL SQL serverless pool.
Okay, so let's go to that. If we go down here to access control, this Dilbert, if you just put a thing and give them Synapse SQL Administrator, guess what? Suddenly everything works. Not a problem. Okay. Little too much rights, right? They have, if you look at the rights, it gives them all rights to like the database, the server. So they could go into here and create, tables and stuff. We don't want to give the end users that, right? So what I was trying to do is there's two types of syntax. It supposedly supports both Azure Active Directory syntax and SQL database syntax for a regular SQL user. Guess what? The docs that I had doesn't work. So that's one of the reasons why I need to put a question out to the product team because it doesn't work as documented. Now, has that ever worked happen at Microsoft? Nah.
Another question is that is it possible to move data using Azure Data Factory activity?
Yes, I did not show you that in Synapse. Is
it possible to work in Synapse?
Yeah, so what I did not show you is that Synapse, I'm going to minimize this, and this is my VM, so let's break this and get out of the VM, try and minimize the slide deck. We can go back to here. So just remember that if you go down to pipelines here, integrate, these pipelines are just Azure Data Factory, right? So we create a new pipeline. And then guess what? You just need to start doing, you got a notebook, you got a Spark job, you can do move and transfer. So this is your regular copy command, right? And then we need a source. So if you have like a on-premise data warehouse and you set up a VPN or Express route and I have access to it, you just stop picking the sources, right? It could be a Oracle database, it could be DB2, whatever, right? A lot of times if it's not supported directly here, and what you do is you do a self-hosted integration runtime, and then you install the correct drivers there and it suddenly works. Like I've read from DB2 before and brought it to the cloud. I've read from Oracle and bring it to cloud. I've read from SQL Server. So it's definitely possible. That's not what we're talking about today. That's the integration. This is the Azure Data Factory piece of it. What we're talking about today was two pieces, right? Lake database. We talked about the SQL database. We talked about linking to storage, right? This is your storage layer right here. Okay. And last but not least, we talked about developing stuff, right? And there's two types, SQL scripts, which are notebooks that do straight SQL like you used to, and notebooks, which are does Spark SQL or Spark,
Right.
PySpark. Yep.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think
Awesome. And I think there was one last question in the thing before I leave, and I just want to make sure everyone's happy before I go. What was the question? Something about moving files or something? I can't find the question.
The question was,
We are processing healthcare transparent reports. Each file is greater than 100 gigabyte. Any suggestions how we can make it faster? There are about 5,000 of these. Okay. So question, whoever put this up here, what format are you usually using right now?
Actually, these files are given as of a JSON, and so these files are
You
so
see me
big
smiling.
that yes.
You know why?
So,
Bad
yes,
format. Don't use JSON. Change the format.
yes, yes,
So,
and
yep.
yes, actually, this is quite headache for us. We cannot just open it anyway, and we have to process it. Yes, I understand. We have to process it part by part and actually upload small portions at a time. And
Okay.
it takes about 4 to
Yep.
5 days to process a single file.
Cool. See a thumbs up? That's the reason why. Bad choice. Okay, and here's the reason why, okay? Waste many of these things work, especially when it's a text delimiter or a format like that. It has to scan the whole file to figure out data types, right? And it has to make sure the JSON's correct. So it's going to have to go through all that 100 gigabyte, reading everything and make sure it's correct before it can actually load it. Okay. Not a good decision. I have a current client that was doing something similar and SQL using CSV files. They were quite large, right? We recently changed them over to Parquet, and the processing time went down from about 2.5 hours to 15 minutes. Okay, less than 15 minutes, and that's including, logging, a lot more stuff they were doing before. So I would suggest that write a process if you can't get away from JSON on premise that reads up the JSON, writes it to Parquet, and then copy over the Parquet files. They'll be a lot smaller because they're compressed.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're
That
welcome.
is very helpful.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. I really appreciate it. Have a wonderful Saturday, and I'll talk to you soon.
thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, everyone. So now we are going to move on to our next session. Sam is there, and he will take the session on Azure Speech Service, and I think it's a very much interesting for us to.
All right. Should I start now, Hassan?
Sure.